Well, here we are again with a review of the second entry in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, The Incredible Hulk. If the public was not aware that the Iron Man movie and this movie existed in the same continuity, that is clarified by the end of this movie. The Incredible Hulk was actually the first Marvel Cinematic Universe movie that I saw. I did hear about the positive response to Iron Man, but I was kinda young and couldn't really go to the movie theater by myself at the time. I didn't like the movie theater environment, and I didn't care about the character Iron Man enough on his own that much, so it wasn't a priority for me to go out and see it as opposed to waiting for Iron Man's release on home video. But this movie was developed out of the early production on a sequel to Ang Lee's The Hulk movie that was somewhat in the works. A script had been completed by Zach Penn before he had to change it in order to serve a different purpose for the movie by Marvel Studios, but it was apparently still kind of similar. Universal did not make another Hulk movie in time, and the film rights reverted back to Marvel Studios. With a loose team of folks that began working on another The Hulk sequel that wasn't going to end up happening, Marvel decided to finance the project themselves, still have Universal distribute it, and make a Hulk movie introducing him to their MCU continuity. Unlike Iron Man, the Hulk was a much more popular superhero due to a previous film and his own TV show from the 70s. So this was less of a gamble, and its releasing only 2 months after Iron Man was possibly a safeguard to recuperate financially if Iron Man underperformed. Interestingly enough, this movie turned out to be one of the lowest grossing Marvel Studios films, however, it still was profitable. Now, I've sort of got a brief non-spoiler review before I delve into the plot. I think all the Marvel Studios movies are at least pretty good, so you probably won't walk away from this movie and get nothing out of it, but as far as how important this movie is to see compared to the other MCU films, it's more on the skippable side. It doesn't set up anything important for the following movies, none of the actors really stand out, but no one turns in a poor performance. The superhero movie tropes are pretty standard. It does kind of mix the monster movie genre in it, but it doesn't really innovate in that genre or the superhero genre or any of the other genres that it falls into, but still a solid flick nonetheless. The protagonist and antagonist have compelling motivations, and this movie uses close-up and narrow camera shots to build tension, which is kinda unique cinematography compared to some of the following Marvel Studios movies. But all in all, Bruce Banner and General Ross in particular are well realized on the big screen. Now, into the spoilers section. I like how we don't play out the origin here, we just sum it up during the opening credits and also later get it explained by General Ross through dialogue. This is good because the origin shouldn't be a whole story, just an explanation of how we get a character to a certain place. With most of the heroes Stan Lee created, their origins were just supposed to be explanations for where their powers came from and sometimes a lesson that they learned. Interesting character arcs can be done for a character through an origin story, like Stan Lee's origin for Spider-Man, but sometimes that wastes time when what we would be more interested in seeing is a story where the character already is the hero that we know and love, and then go from there. However, some of the details behind Hulk's origin are changed to better link it to the cinematic universe they're creating, like instead of Dr. Banner absorbing gamma radiation in a bomb test and becoming the Hulk, which might have been a little too similar to Tony Stark being hit by a bomb and getting shrapnel in his heart, Bruce Banner is deceived into researching super soldier development. It's kind of neat to be referencing Captain America already. Banner has been told that he's researching radiation resistance and ends up using himself as the test subject, and hulks out, hurts a bunch of people, causes a lot of property damage, and then General Ross becomes fixated on capturing him. Basically, the crux of their ideological conflict in this film is who should possess the power of the Hulk. Banner doesn't think it should be possessed by anyone because of its volatile and destructive nature and wants to destroy the Hulk, while Ross wants it in his possession so he can try to weaponize an army of Hulks. The movie starts out with Banner taking refuge in Brazil while looking for exotic ingredients and working on a cure for the Hulk with an online companion, Mr. Blue. But he also has been learning meditation to control his anger and pulse rate, and he has to work at a factory for income. Banner and Mr. Blue end up exhausting their ideas, and Banner reluctantly sends Mr. Blue a blood sample, which ends up being helpful, but Mr. Blue needs more information about the research that created the Hulk. And that research happens to be located at the university that Banner used to work at. One day, while working at the factory, Banner cuts his finger and bleeds out. He thinks that he cleaned it all up, but more blood dropped than he thought, and it ended up in a bottle of soda which was shipped to the US. The person who eventually drank the soda died of gamma radiation poisoning. Now, General Ross is on the lookout for gamma radiation related occurrences, and tracks that back to Brazil, and sends soldiers to investigate, including a new elite soldier from the United Kingdom, Emil Blonsky. The soldiers track down Banner and chase him through the city in an awesome, intense, Jason Bourne-esque chase scene. Banner tries to hide in the factory that he works at, but while running through the city, he literally runs into some bullies from work who take it as a threat of aggression, then chase after him too. They beat up Banner in the factory, and the Hulk is unleashed. The military futilely tries to neutralize the Hulk, which provokes the Hulk into retaliation. In the factory fight scene, there's never a clear shot of the Hulk. Most of him is hidden in shadows, or we just see a silhouette, or see him briefly from a side angle, but the dark and cramped environment of the factory builds tension really nicely, and I also like the idea of adapting the Hulk to the big screen with a monster movie tone for part of it, because the Hulk comic book was influenced by some of those old Universal monster movies. Then after escaping the factory, the Hulk moves around South America, so then Banner has to travel through multiple countries to eventually reach his destination, the university he used to work at, which holds the information that he needs. He has an old friend in town, Stanley the pizza maker, who informs us that Betty, his old girlfriend and colleague on what was the super soldier experiment, has moved on from Banner since he's been gone and has a new boyfriend. Stanley gives Banner a place to stay and a pizza delivery uniform to help bribe the university security with pizza. He searches the university database without finding anything. Back at Stanley's restaurant, Banner coincidentally, but still in this context is a likely coincidence, walks in while Betty and her therapist boyfriend are chatting with Stanley in a closed restaurant. Betty searches the town for Banner and finds him trying to hitchhike. Betty wants to catch up with Banner, and it turns out she grabbed the data from the university and hid it before the government removed it from their database. Being the scientist that she is, she thought it might be useful knowledge at some time. Meanwhile, Blonsky gets a dose of a more refined version of the super soldier serum to boost his physical prowess, but potentially impairing his judgment. Somehow, Betty's therapist boyfriend finds out that Banner is in town, and he knows who Banner is. It's unclear how he knows about Banner. Betty probably told her boyfriend about him in the past, but presumably thinking a fugitive is a threat to Betty's safety, he alerts the authorities. A firefight breaks out at the university, and the Hulk is finally revealed in full force. Blonsky's judgment does in fact become impaired from the super soldier serum, and he goes toe-to-toe with the Hulk only to be kicked into a tree and break all his bones. It's revealed that General Ross is Betty's father, which probably explains why she was on the experiment that led to the Hulk. During the confrontation, Ross's obsession with capturing the Hulk is illustrated when he endangers Betty by ordering the gunships to fire on the Hulk, with Betty in the crossfire. However, the Hulk demonstrates that he isn't devoid of compassion, as he protects Betty from the explosion and gunfire, then is gentle with her as they escape and hide in the mountains. Banner sends Mr. Blue the data from the university in an email without encrypted communications, since he is forced to use a gas station desktop, since that's all that they have available at the time, which General Ross and S.H.I.E.L.D. discover because they figured out that Banner's aliases are Mr. Green and Mr. Blue, thereby finding the email from those keywords. General Ross's crew was able to decrypt Banner's communications from his laptop it left in Brazil, I guess, and discover those alias names that way. A question I had since you see Banner send Mr. Blue blood samples was why the military was only able to decrypt those aliases and not Mr. Blue's address that the samples were sent to, so I guess they were using a fake address. Anyway, another thing that doesn't make a whole lot of sense is why Banner is still using those aliases off of the encrypted network. Banner's too careful a guy. Shouldn't he suspect that the military was able to decrypt some of his stuff and also suspect that they now know some keywords to watch for? Also, why does Mr. Blue have Banner send him the data to his work email that has Mr. Blue's real name in the address, and it can be traced back to him, which is what S.H.I.E.L.D. ended up doing? These guys have been so careful up until this point. I don't buy that they would get careless at a crucial point right here. It seems like more of a problem with the writers not knowing how to tie up all the loose ends in the third act, so they end up making contrivances. Anyway, Banner and Betty continued on together to New York to meet Mr. Blue, or Samuel Stearns as it turns out his name is. I don't know why Betty tags along with Banner to New York. She doesn't really have anything to offer in terms of covert travel. She would just be a liability for Banner in that regard. It's true Betty has expertise in the biological sciences, but to my understanding, Stearns and Banner are already in good shape. Also, she's made a bit unlikable when she just abandons her therapist boyfriend. He was a good guy and she just up and leaves when her old spark reappears. Anyway, on the way to New York, Banner has to stop himself from having sex with Betty because if his heart rate gets too high, he'll Hulk out. The threat of the Hulk forces him to change his behavior constantly in his personal life. And this is another case of the Hulk being a curse. Even in Banner's most intimate moments, the Hulk threatens him and he must deny himself of the woman he loves. I like that in this incarnation, the Hulk transforms when Banner's heart rate gets over a certain rate. It's more quantifiable than he transforms when under emotional stress, and his threshold is pretty high, so the heart rate guarantees that the circumstances have to be somewhat extreme if the writers want to transform him. Eventually, Banner and Stearns meet up with the Hulk info, and they start working on a cure. Stearns had cloned Banner's blood samples so he could experiment with it to unsuccessful results, but believes it has amazing potential to be harnessed. They test out the Hulk antidote, which immediately reverses the Hulk back into Banner, but they aren't sure if it's a cure or if it just temporarily suppresses the Hulk. Of course, it turns out to be the latter. When General Ross's cavalry arrive, Banner and Betty are taken into custody. Blonsky, who's been experiencing serious side effects from the serum, obsesses over the Hulk's power and how it will give him strength like he used to have, and threatens Stearns into infusing him with the Hulk's blood, which transforms Blonsky into the Abomination. Blonsky loses his mind, then rampages around Harlem. As we can see, not even a soldier in the military should try and be weaponized as the Hulk. It's too volatile. We also get a quick Easter egg alluding to the Hulk villain, the Leader. Samuel Stearns is the name of that character in the comics, and after the Abomination wrecks the lab, some of Banner's blood drips onto a cut on his forehead, and he smiles and his forehead bulges. This is something that hasn't been brought up again in any of the following Marvel Cinematic Universe films so far, but I haven't exactly seen anyone clamoring for the Leader in the first place. Some people criticize the appearance of the Abomination for either looking bad or not close enough to the comics or too generic looking of a CGI monster, which is kind of a matter of personal aesthetic preferences. I personally think he looks alright. They probably could have made his skin a little bit scaly or even gone a little closer to the comic book appearance and not make it look cheesy, just to distinguish him a little more from other large CGI monsters that are seen in blockbuster movies of the contemporary day. They could have explained it by just saying that the serum Ross had contained some fish DNA in it. But as it is right now, the proportions of the Abomination look good, and he has the spiky spine like from the comics, which also works. Thematically, he's a messed up attempt to weaponize the Hulk, but gone haywire, so I think the Abomination is a solid villain, at least in the context of this film. I don't know how he stacks up compared to his comic book counterpart outside of how he looks, though. In the climax, General Ross and Banner's hands are forced, knowing that the military is futile against a creature that possesses the Hulk's power, so they decide not using the Hulk would probably cause more damage to the city than if they try and aim the Hulk to stop the Abomination. The Abomination and the Hulk's fight is kind of brutal. There's stabbing and blood and innocent people getting directly murdered in the background. As the MCU progresses, they generally move further away from this kind of thing and build tension differently in action scenes, which is still effective. Most of the time the stakes actually feel higher than this fight, but it's interesting to observe how the violence has evolved over the course of these films. Then after defeating the Abomination, the Hulk escapes the military and Banner hides away in the wilderness of British Columbia and sends a letter to return Betty's necklace, which is a thing that isn't really given any significance. Maybe it's supposed to represent his separation of his old life and his life with the Hulk, but I don't know. Then he's meditating and his eyes glow green. Apparently it's supposed to indicate that he has control over the Hulk at the moment. Then the number of days without an incident drops to 0 in the text on screen, which makes it seem like he used meditation to evoke the Hulk and now he'll rampage around British Columbia. And then we get one of my favorite scenes in the movie, Tony Stark's cameo. It connects this movie with Iron Man and hints that Ross and S.H.I.E.L.D. or Tony might work together to track down the Hulk and get him on the Avengers. Overall, this movie is quite good. It has some plot holes which results in a little inconsistent characterization. Betty is a significant character, but then becomes a tacked-on love interest who the writers want to give more screen time by the end. But this film has a solid story. The tone is unique. Sometimes it feels like a monster movie, sometimes it feels like a thrilling chase movie, and it's got a couple worthwhile character arcs. This movie is a decent example of the Hulk on the big screen. I give The Incredible Hulk a 3.5 out of 5.